Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD News. I'm your host, Melina Weiskup. Just weeks after Silicon Valley Bank failed, an even bigger lender, First Republic Bank, collapsed today. Meanwhile, President Biden promises that the U.S. banking sector is safe. NTD's Iris Tao brings us more from the White House.
Good evening, Melina. President Biden says taxpayers are not on the hook for the latest failure of First Republic Bank, which was seized by federal regulators and sold to J.P. Morgan on Monday morning.
While depositors are being protected, shareholders are losing their investments. And critically, taxpayers are not the ones that are on the hook, as I said earlier.
The Federal Deposit Insurance Corp, or FDIC, brokered a deal for J.P. Morgan Chase, the nation's largest bank, to take over almost all of First Republic's deposits and assets. The intervention comes less than 2 months after Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank both failed amid massive bank runs. All three banks failed to prepare for rising interest rates, which made a large chunk of their government bonds and other assets plunge in value. Now, 3 of the 4 largest ever U.S. bank failures have occurred in the past 2 months. But President Biden says the latest intervention will make sure that the banking sector is safe.
These actions are going to make sure that the banking system is safe and sound. We have to make sure that we're not back in this position again. And I think we're well on our way to be able to make that assurance.
But while Biden calls for stricter regulations on banks,
the whole bank executive is accountable.
Some Republicans say it's a combination of failures of bank management, regulators, and the Biden administration's economic policies that have led to recent bank collapses.
And Iris, today President Biden also met with the Philippines leader. Tell us more about that.
Sure, Melina. President Biden on Monday met with Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the president of Philippines. And in their meeting, they agreed to new guidelines for stronger military cooperation. And that sends a clear message to China, basically telling Beijing that as China is expanding its influence in the South China Sea, the U.S. and its ally Philippines are now deepening their ties to push back. Melina.
NTD's Iris Tao reporting from the White House. And in addition to President Biden seeking his second term in 2024, there's a growing list of GOP candidates. Senator Tim Scott is expected to announce his official candidacy later this month in South Carolina. The latest to join the crowded GOP primary is Larry Elder, a conservative talk show host and candidate who ran against California Governor Gavin Newsom during the 2021 recall election. Elder announced his candidacy last week, saying that America's decline is not inevitable. Let's hear his ideas for returning the nation to its traditions. Larry Elder, thanks for joining me. So you say your idea for the nation is to enter what you describe as a new America golden age, which is an interesting way to describe it. I'm curious, what does that look like and how do you get there?
Well, I think that Republicans are divided on 45. There are people that love Donald Trump and people that love what Donald Trump did as president and support his policies, as did I. But they have a real concern about whether or not Donald Trump can beat Joe Biden in November 2024. For reasons that I think are almost entirely unfair, much of the country, Melina, would not vote for Donald Trump if he walked on water. They'd say he can't swim. I would ask you and I would ask your viewers, do you have friends that you no longer are friendly with because of Donald Trump? Do you have colleagues that you can no longer talk to at work because of Donald Trump? Do you have relatives that you now have to distance yourself because of Donald Trump? I think a lot of people would say yes, particularly the all-important so-called swing voters, maybe 200,000 to 300,000 people that will decide this election. Now, the question is, given the fact that you love Donald Trump's policies, you support the wall, you support strong borders, you support school choice, you don't like the way cops have been treated, and as a result, crime is up because of all these soft on crime DAs. You don't like the inflation. You don't like the fact that gas prices have gone up because of the war on oil and gas. If you feel that way, but you want a vehicle, somebody who is likable, relatable, got a good sense of humor, knowledgeable, who's been talking about these issues from a conservative perspective for some 40 years, and you want to make sure you win in November, I'm that guy.
Now, to that point, I actually want to talk to you. You mentioned, before in many media interviews that you're the likable alternative to Donald Trump, which you just kind of touched on a little bit. So speaking of the divisiveness around Trump's name, and just that just shows how our modern day politics has become this atmosphere of just attacking your political opponents rather than speaking of your own policy agenda or your own policy platform. And I want to ask you, Larry, do you think there's room for candidates to be successful if they don't choose this negative approach and instead try to take a more positive approach to their candidacy?
I certainly think so, and I know that you covered my race when I ran for governor of California. You might recall I became the front runner as soon as I got in, and my lead only increased as the 8 weeks left. I got into the campaign late. I did not say one negative thing about any of my Republican rivals. I was given a chance to tee off on John Cox, who ran against Gavin Newsom the first time, or Caitlyn Jenner, or Kevin Faulconer, the two-term mayor of San Diego, who's the one, by the way, that Kevin McCarthy and the Republican congressional delegation wanted. I didn't do that at all because I knew that the firepower had to be directed towards Gavin Newsom, the first part of the ballot. And frankly, in my opinion, had my fellow Republicans done the same thing, the first part of the ballot would have succeeded, which is, do you want Gavin Newsom gone? And then the second part is, whom do you want to replace him? And overwhelmingly, that answer was Larry Elder. I got 49% of the replacement vote. The second highest person got 9%. I got 3.5 million voters. California has 58 counties. I carried 57. The only one I lost was San Francisco, and I lost that by, wait for it, 149 votes. $27 million raised in 8 weeks from 150,000 individual donors, half of whom came from outside of California. So I absolutely think you can stick to the issues. And I talked about how Gavin Newsom shut down the state, ignoring science, people leaving, that our school test scores are near the bottom. The way the average price of a home in California is 175% above the national average, which is the #1 reason people give for leaving California. I kept my focus on that. Had my Republican rivals done that, I think we would have been successful. Similarly, I will not say anything negative about Trump or DeSantis or anybody else who gets in, because they're not the issue. The issue is Harris and Biden, what they've done to the country, what they've done to our borders, what they've done to inflation, how they've made us now energy dependent from energy independent. We can't afford 4 more years of those guys. And I think if we stick to that, we're going to win no matter who the Republican nominee is.
Very interesting points. Thank you, Larry Elder, for joining me today, and good luck with your 2024 race. To break down the key findings of spiritual suppression around the globe and ideas for how to address these ongoing violations of religious freedom, we're happy to have on Chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, Nury Turkel. So, Nuri, I want to first ask your overall takeaway with the reporting you've done on China's human rights abuses specifically against people of faith. We know this regime persecutes people from all walks of faith, including Christians, Muslims, Falun Dafa practitioners. What's the latest takeaways from this year's report with regards to China?
First of all, thank you very much for highlighting our report. As you may know, that we have been recommending and identifying China as a CPC country since 1999. CPC stands for Country of Particular Concern. This was a year after the law enacted that established our office and the Office of International Religious Freedom at the State Department. The reason that I'm bringing this up is because instead of making improvements in Chinese government's treatment of people of faith, people of belief, they have been ratcheting up and turning this regime into a genocidal regime. They have been ruthlessly persecuting religious groups, including the Uyghur Muslims, Tibetan Buddhists, Christians, Falun Gong practitioners. The human rights situation, religious freedom situation in China has significantly deteriorated since last year. That includes cynicization of religion, elevating the religious practices of individuals, as I just named, or the groups that I've named, into the national security level. The Chinese government publicly, openly labels people of faith into some sort of people who have mental illness or affected with thought viruses. Just the last year, we have seen a number of significant developments, including the ongoing Uyghur genocide that is in its 7th year, persecution of Tibetan Buddhists, blocking or restricting their access to religious sites, religious gatherings, destroying sites of religious significance. And also we have seen uptick and the pressure on the Falun Gong community. 172 Falun Gong deaths were reported last year. And the persecution of the Catholic community also needs some attention. China's government not only failed to fulfill its obligation under the Vatican-China agreement, at least to be able to allow Vatican to have a saying in the appointment of bishops, they have been forcing the Chinese Catholics to pledge allegiance to the Patriotic Catholic Association. And also, most disturbingly, the Chinese have been using its soft power, economic power, and malign activities to silence international community that includes UN Human Rights Council.
Wow, definitely a lot of very important information you just laid out there. And, you know, I want to hone in on a point you just mentioned, that China's situation has degenerated. I want to point out a recent case. You said the uptick of persecutions, specifically related to Falun Gong practitioners. There was a recent case of a 30-year-old young man named Peng Shun, who is actually a radio host in China. He died this past December. I'm sure you're familiar with this case, after the Chinese regime persecuted him. Now, we have seen footage of his body shown covered in bruises and what appear to be electric baton marks from the torture that he was exposed to. And this is not just one case. There are many like this. So I want to know, from your perspective, what kind of volume of cases are you seeing similar to this type of inhumane treatment?
The Falun Gong practitioners has been subject to all forms of torture, physical abuse, hospitalization under the guise of them being mentally ill. You know, this goes way back to the Jiang Zemin era. Not only that, we have credible reports that China has been engaging in organ harvesting. This is also a decades-long practices. And I'm so pleased to report that this issue is gaining momentum, gaining attention in the U.S. Congress. We have a bill introduced recently to address this specific issue. At the end of the day, the Chinese leadership would need to recognize that people of faith actually not a threat to the society, actually helps to have a healthy society. This has been shown by Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetan Buddhists, and other people of faith. Instead of spending so much money and resources on domestic security, China needs to loosen up its restriction on religious practices. They need to get over with this fear of religion in general. They should allow the people of China, all faith, to be able to live with dignity and to be able to practice their religion or adhere to their religious belief. You know, there have been scientific academic research results been published. The countries that respect religious freedom naturally becomes harmonious and peaceful society.
So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, you know, you all have released this report as you do every year. So what do you think that Western countries can do specifically within your organization in America to oppose this type of religious persecution in China?
We have recommended the United States government to approach or utilize whole of the government approach by elevating and integrating religious freedom as a key strategic objective in the U.S. foreign policy toward China, and by raising religious freedom concerns in all bilateral dialogue or engagement, if you will. We also call on the U.S. government to impose all the sanctions tools or tools at our disposals, in our toolbox, to expand the sanctioning over to the Chinese entities and officials that have been responsible for human rights abuses. We also wanted the U.S. government to address, along with our allies and partners, the transnational repression. The Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party, have been engaging in malign activities in within our countries, in the United States and Europe. We're talking about a significant number of satellite police stations specifically established and function to silence the critics of the Chinese Communist Party. That has to stop. And those who have been carrying out these activities need to be held to account.
Wow, thank you so much for laying that out in such a clear and concise way. I'm sure many abroad and at home are really appreciating the work that you all are doing to allow religious freedom across the globe. Thank you, Nury.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.